My friends, something really interesting is unfolding around the Detroit Lions right now, and if you're paying close attention to how this team is being built, this moment in the draft process might quietly say a lot about what's coming next. The Lions are now on the clock at pick number 50 in this community mock draft scenario, and after already addressing the offensive line with Spencer Fano at number 17, the focus clearly shifts to the defensive side of the ball, more specifically to the edge position, and here's where things get very telling. The fan base itself is almost completely locked in on one idea. When the poll went live, the overwhelming majority of votes centered around two names, TJ Parker out of Clemson and Gabe Jacas from Illinois. And what stands out isn't just the names, it's the position. Fans clearly feel that adding another edge rusher is not just a luxury, it's becoming a necessity. Now, before even seeing those voting results, the decision here had already been made, and it lines up almost perfectly with what the community is thinking. With the 50th overall pick, the selection is TJ Parker, edge, Clemson. And when you really break this down, it starts to make a lot of sense for where the Lions are right now as a roster. Because if you go back just 1 year, Parker wasn't being talked about as a second-round player, not even close. Heading into the 2025 season, he was viewed as one of the top edge rushers in the entire draft class. We're talking about a guy coming off a dominant 2024 season where he led Clemson with 11 sacks, piled up 19.5 tackles for loss, and even set a school record with 6 forced fumbles. That's not just production, that's impact at a very high level. But then 2025 happened and everything shifted. Clemson as a program had a disastrous season overall, and that collapse affected a lot of their defensive players, including Parker. His numbers dropped, 5 sacks, 9.5 tackles for loss, and naturally, his draft stock followed that decline. What once looked like a potential top 10 pick suddenly turned into a late first or even mid-second round projection. And this is exactly where things get interesting for a team like Detroit. Because when you look beyond just the raw numbers, Parker's profile still holds a lot of value. Multiple draft analysts still have him ranked in that late first to early second range. Daniel Jeremiah had him at 24th, Jordan Reed and Todd McShay both at 28th, Dane Brugler at 31st, and Trevor Sikkema at 34th. That tells you something important. This isn't a player who suddenly lost his talent. This is a player whose situation changed. When you turn on the tape, you still see a rugged pass rusher who wins with power. His ability to convert speed into power off the edge stands out immediately, especially with that long arm move that can shock offensive linemen and create separation quickly. He may not have elite outside burst, but his quickness becomes much more effective when he kicks inside, giving him some positional versatility that defensive coordinators love to work with. And then there's the run defense. Parker isn't just a pass rusher, he can hold his ground. He generates real knockback power at the point of attack and does a good job keeping blockers from getting into his frame. That's the kind of physicality that fits exactly what the Lions have been building defensively. From a physical and athletic standpoint, he checks a lot of boxes too. His frame lines up well with the type of edge defenders Detroit has brought in over the past few years. And when you look at his explosiveness and get off, it gets even more intriguing. His 10-yard split matches what Aiden Hutchinson posted, and his broad jump actually exceeds it slightly. Those are not small details. They point to a player who has the raw tools to develop into something more. Now, is he a finished product? Not yet. One of the biggest areas he still needs to develop is his pass rush counters. Right now, he relies heavily on power and effort, which works. But at the NFL level, you need more ways to win. The encouraging part is that the foundation is already there. The motor, the strength, the effort. It's consistent, and when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, this could be exactly the kind of value pick that good teams capitalize on. A player who once had top 10 expectations now available at pick 50, still productive across his college career, still athletic, still fitting the scheme. It's the kind of move that doesn't always make the loudest noise on draft night, but can pay off in a big way down the line.
Especially when you consider what the Lions have been missing on the opposite side of Hutchinson over the past few seasons. There hasn't really been a true, consistent pass rushing threat to complement him. Parker has a real chance to step into that role and potentially become the most natural pass rushing fit they've had in that spot in years. So now the question becomes less about whether this pick makes sense and more about what it could turn into if Parker reaches his ceiling in this system. Because if he does, the Lions might not just be adding depth, they might be adding a key piece to elevate the entire defense. And that's where I want to hear from you. Do you see TJ Parker as the right move here at pick 50, or would you have gone in a different direction to address another need on this roster? And if you really take that question a step further, it starts to open up an even bigger conversation about how the Lions are approaching this entire roster build. Because this isn't just about adding another name to the defensive line rotation. This is about identity. This is about how far this front office is willing to go to double down on what they believe wins in this league. Because let's be honest for a second, everything about this selection screams calculated risk with high upside. You're not drafting TJ Parker based purely on what he was in 2025. You're drafting him because of what he showed in 2024, and more importantly, because of the traits that still show up regardless of the statistical dip. That's a very specific kind of bet, and it's one that good teams are usually more comfortable making. Think about the context here. The Lions already secured help on the offensive line earlier with Spencer Fano, which stabilizes one of the core pillars of the team. Now, coming into the second round, instead of playing it safe or addressing a less volatile position, they lean into a premium role, edge rusher, and take a player whose stock dropped under circumstances that weren't entirely in his control. That tells you this front office is confident in its ability to develop talent, not just draft it. And development is really the key word here. Because if Parker lands in this system, he's not walking in as the guy. He's walking into a situation where he can rotate, learn, and refine his game without immediately carrying the full weight of expectations. That matters, especially for a player who is still learning how to expand his pass rush arsenal. You can already picture how he would be used early on. Situational pass rusher, lining up across from Aiden Hutchinson, taking advantage of one-on-one matchups. And if offensive lines start sliding protection toward Hutchinson, as they often do, that creates exactly the kind of opportunities Parker thrives on. Power rushes, collapsing the pocket, forcing quarterbacks off their spot. That's where his impact could start showing up quickly, even before he becomes a complete player. But what really makes this intriguing is what happens if he does develop those missing counters. Because that's the difference between a solid rotational edge and a legitimate every down threat. Right now, he wins with strength, leverage, and effort. Add refined hand usage, add a couple of reliable counter moves, and suddenly you're talking about a player who can consistently win against starting caliber offensive tackles. And let's not ignore the production profile across his full college career. Even with the drop in 2025, the overall numbers still paint a picture of consistency. Over his time at Clemson, he generated more tackles for loss than games played, and maintained a steady presence in the backfield. That kind of disruption translates, especially when paired with NFL-level coaching and structure. There's also something to be said about how his style fits regardless of potential scheme tweaks. Whether the Lions stick with their current defensive structure or adjust elements of it, Parker's ability to set the edge against the run and collapse pockets from multiple alignments gives the coaching staff flexibility. He's not locked into one role, and that versatility increases his value beyond just being a situational player. Now, of course, this move isn't without its questions. You can't completely ignore the dip in production. You can't just assume that every player who slides in the draft will automatically bounce back. There's always that risk that what you saw in 2025 is closer to the new normal than the outlier. And that's where evaluation becomes everything, understanding whether the drop-off was about the player or about the environment around him. But this is exactly the kind of swing that separates teams that stay competitive from teams that take the next step. Because if you hit on this pick, you're not just adding depth, you're potentially solving a long-standing issue on the defense. You're giving Hutchinson a true counterpart. You're making the pass rush less predictable, more dangerous, more complete. And when you stack that on top of the first-round investment in the offensive line, you start to see a very clear pattern forming. Build the trenches, control the line of scrimmage, create pressure without needing to rely on constant blitzing. That's a formula that travels, especially in the playoffs. So now everything circles back to projection. Not just what Parker is today, but what he can realistically become in this system, with this coaching staff, and alongside the talent already on this roster. Because if the Lions are right about him, this could end up being one of those picks that looks even better a year or two down the line than it does right now. But that's the gamble, and that's what makes this moment so interesting. Because once you start thinking about that question in a broader sense, it forces you to look beyond just this single pick and really evaluate the direction of the entire defense. Adding TJ Parker alone doesn't magically fix everything, but it can be the piece that changes how everything else functions. Picture the ripple effect. If Parker develops even into a consistent rotational threat early on, offenses can no longer afford to key entirely on Aiden Hutchinson. Protection schemes start to shift. Chips and double teams become less predictable. That alone can create more one-on-one opportunities across the defensive front, and suddenly the entire pass rush starts to feel more alive, more aggressive, more difficult to contain. And that's where this move quietly becomes bigger than it looks on the surface. Because the Lions haven't really had that complementary edge presence in recent years. It's been a revolving door of players trying to fill that role, but none truly locking it down long-term. Parker doesn't have to come in and be elite right away. He just has to be enough of a threat to force offenses to respect both sides. That's the first step toward building a complete pass rush unit. Now, if you combine that with internal development from other defensive pieces, the ceiling of this unit starts to rise. Defensive success in the NFL is rarely about one superstar carrying everything. It's about waves of pressure, consistency, and depth. And this pick leans directly into that philosophy. But here's where things get even more interesting. This kind of selection also suggests that the Lions may believe their biggest defensive improvements will come from within, not just from adding more high-profile names. Drafting Parker isn't just about filling a need. It's about trusting the coaching staff to unlock what's already there while adding the right complementary traits to the mix. At the same time, you can't ignore the possibility that this isn't the final move. The draft still has more rounds, and there are always post-draft adjustments, potential veteran additions, and roster cuts around the league. If the Lions truly see themselves as contenders, they may not stop here. This could be step one in a larger plan to reinforce the defense from multiple angles. And that brings you back to the philosophy behind this front office. They've consistently shown a willingness to stay patient, to build through the draft, and to prioritize long-term stability over quick fixes. Taking a player like Parker in this spot fits that mindset perfectly. It's not flashy, it's not reckless, it's a measured bet on talent, traits, and development. But at the same time, patience doesn't mean passivity. If there's an opportunity to elevate this defense even further, whether through another draft pick or a strategic addition, you have to wonder if they'll take it. Because the window to compete at the highest level doesn't stay open forever, and teams that recognize that tend to act with urgency when the moment is right. So now you're looking at a situation where one pick has potentially set the tone for everything that follows. The Lions addressed the offensive line early. They targeted upside and value on the edge in the second round, and now the question becomes how they finish this process. Do they continue to stack defensive talent? Do they look at other areas that might still need reinforcement? Or do they trust that what they've built so far is enough to take that next step? That's the tension right now. That's what makes this stage of the offseason so compelling. Because every move from here on out either reinforces the vision or leaves just enough doubt to keep asking whether one more piece is missing. And that's exactly where I want to leave this with you. If the Lions walk away from this draft with additions like Spencer Fano and T.J. Parker and rely on internal growth for the rest, is that a strong enough foundation to seriously contend?